Thank you for staying with God. There are so few of us. Please subscribe and listen until the end.
Hey, I'm Rick, and I'm a fisherman by trade. Been out on the water most of my life. And there's something about the sea that I've always loved: its freedom, its vastness, the peace it can give when the world feels too loud. But as much as I love the ocean, I've always had a healthy respect for it too. The sea isn't something you mess with lightly. It can be calm one minute and turn deadly the next. And that's exactly what happened to me on a day I'll never forget. I don't usually talk about this kind of stuff, but after what happened, I feel like I have to share it. Maybe it'll help someone, maybe it'll just serve as a reminder that sometimes, when you're at your lowest, something bigger is watching over you. This happened a couple of years ago. I was out alone, just me and my boat, a small trawler I've had for years. I was working the coast, hauling in some traps, nothing too far from shore. The weather report had said it was going to be a calm day, so I wasn't too worried. But anyone who's been on the water long enough knows that the weather doesn't always follow the forecast. I'd been out since early morning, and by mid-afternoon, the sky started to change. You know that feeling when the air shifts? When it gets heavy, almost electric. That's what it felt like. The wind picked up, the clouds started rolling in, and before I knew it, the waves were getting rough, fast. I thought about heading back right then, but I figured I had a little more time. Big mistake. Within an hour, the sea turned angry. The wind was howling, and waves were slamming into the side of the boat. It wasn't just a typical squall. This was a full-blown storm, and I was right in the middle of it. I tried to navigate through it, but the visibility was awful. Rain was coming down so hard I could barely see a few feet in front of me, and the waves were getting bigger by the minute. Every time I thought I had control, another massive wave would hit, tossing the boat around like a toy. My heart was pounding, and I was gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles were white. But it didn't matter. The storm was too strong, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't steer out of it. Water was pouring into the boat, and I knew I was in real trouble. I was miles from shore, no way to call for help. My radio had gone out when the storm hit. I was completely alone, just me and the sea, and it felt like the ocean was going to swallow me whole. At some point, I just stopped trying. I was exhausted, beaten down by the storm, and I couldn't fight it anymore. I remember thinking, this is it. I've been out on the water enough times to know when you're outmatched, and this was one of those times. I had nothing left. The waves kept crashing, the wind kept screaming, and I just let go of the wheel. I didn't see any way out. I thought about my family, my kids, and the fact that I'd never see them again. I was ready to give up. And then, something happened that I still can't fully explain. In the middle of all that chaos, the wind, the rain, the waves, everything suddenly went quiet. I didn't understand what was going on at first. I looked around, and it was like the storm had split right in front of me. The clouds above me were still black, the rain still pouring down, but right in front of my boat, there was this clear path through the waves. It was as if the sea had parted, giving me a way out. I blinked a couple of times, not believing what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. 1 minute, I was about to be swallowed by the storm, and the next, there was this open stretch of water, calm and still, like nothing I'd ever seen before. I didn't have time to think about it. I just grabbed the wheel and steered into that path, my heart pounding in my chest. The storm was still raging all around me, but it couldn't touch me. The waves that had been tossing my boat round like a rag doll were now on either side of me, but not a single one hit the boat. It was like I was in this bubble of calm, this safe space where the storm couldn't reach me. I can't explain how or why it happened, but I knew in my gut that this was no coincidence. This was something or someone guiding me, protecting me, showing me the way. I followed that clear path for what felt like forever, but it was probably only a few minutes. And just as suddenly as it had appeared, the path opened up into calm waters. The storm was still roaring behind me, but I was out of it. I made it through. I was alive. I remember pulling back the throttle and just sitting there for a minute, my hands shaking, trying to catch my breath. I couldn't believe it. 1 minute I'd been on the brink of disaster, and the next, I was safe. I looked back at the storm, still raging in the distance, and I knew, without a doubt, that I hadn't made it through that storm on my own. There was no way. I don't know what you believe in, but I'm telling you, there was something out there with me that day. Something bigger than me, bigger than the storm. I felt it, and it's stuck with me ever since. I've been out on the water plenty of times since then, but I've never experienced anything like that again. After the storm, I made my way back to shore, still shaken up by everything that had happened. I told a few of my buddies about it, but I don't think they really believed me. Maybe they thought I was just tired, or that I'd imagined it all in the heat of the moment. But I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. I believed with all my heart that God was with me out there. He parted that storm and gave me a way out when I had no hope left. I don't know why I was saved that day, but I'm grateful for it. Every time I look at the sea now, I think about that moment. And it reminds me that no matter how bad things get, no matter how lost you feel, there's always a way through. You just have to trust that something bigger is looking out for you, even when you can't see it. So, that's my story. I don't know if it'll make sense to everyone, but it's what happened. And if you're going through your own storm right now, just hang on. You're not alone, even when it feels like you are. There's always a path to safety, even when you can't see it yet. Thanks for listening.
Hi, my name is Laura, and I've never been someone who shares personal stuff online. But this is different. I can't explain what happened to me that night, and honestly, I'm not even sure I understand it myself. I've spent a lot of time trying to make sense of it, but some things just don't fit into neat little boxes, you know? Sometimes things happen that make you question everything. And that's exactly what this is for me. It was about a year ago, but it still feels like yesterday. I lost my son, Jake, in a car accident. He was only 19. I can barely bring myself to talk about it because there aren't any words that can describe that kind of pain. Losing a child, it's unnatural. It's like a part of you dies too. And no matter how much time passes, that hole in your heart never really heals. Jake was my world. He was funny, kind, always looking out for his friends and family. He had this way of lighting up a room with just a smile. And just like that, he was gone. In an instant. One moment, everything was fine, and the next, I was getting the call that no parent should ever have to get. I didn't handle it well, to put it mildly. How could I? The days after his death were a blur. I barely ate, barely slept. I went through the motions because I had to, but inside, I was numb. Every morning, I'd wake up hoping that it had all been a bad dream. That Jake would come walking through the door, laughing like he always did. But of course, that never happened. It was a few months after his death when the real grief hit. The kind that knocks you down and leaves you gasping for air. I'd been holding it together for so long, for my family, for everyone else. But one night, it all came crashing down. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to be alone, to get away from everyone's well-meaning words and sympathy. I needed something. I didn't even know what. That's how I ended up at the church. It was late, maybe around midnight, and I didn't expect anyone to be there. I wasn't even sure why I went. I wasn't particularly religious, though I grew up going to church. I guess I just needed somewhere quiet, somewhere to think or scream or cry without anyone watching. When I got there, the doors were unlocked. The church was dark, except for a few candles flickering at the altar. It was empty, just like I'd hoped. I walked down the aisle, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the silence. My heart felt heavy, and I could barely hold back the tears. I sat down in one of the pews, my hands shaking, and I just let it all out. The grief, the anger, the hopelessness. I cried harder than I ever had before. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, I noticed someone sitting a few rows ahead of me. I hadn't seen anyone when I came in, so it startled me. He was an older man, dressed simply, sitting there quietly, like he'd been waiting for something. Or someone. I remember thinking it was odd, because I'd been sure the church was empty when I arrived. But I was too drained to care at that point. The man turned to look at me, and there was something in his eyes, something calm, peaceful. He smiled, not in a way that was too forward, just a kind, soft smile that somehow eased a little bit of the pain in my chest. He didn't say anything for a long time, just looked at me like he understood everything I was feeling. And then he spoke. It's hard, isn't it? Letting go. His voice was gentle, almost like a whisper, but it cut through the silence of the church. I didn't respond at first. I didn't know how. It was such a simple thing to say, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. Letting go. That's exactly what I couldn't do. I finally managed to ask him, "How do you know?" And what he said next sent a chill down my spine. "He's with you. You know. He hasn't left." I froze. How could he know? How could this stranger in an empty church know anything about Jake? I hadn't told him a single thing, hadn't mentioned my son, but there he was, talking as if he knew everything about me. "I'm not sure I believe that," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "If he was still with me, I'd feel him." "I don't feel anything." The man nodded, as if he understood exactly what I meant. "Sometimes," he said, "we're so blinded by our pain that we can't see the light that's right in front of us. Jake wanted me to remind you of that. He's still watching over you, even when you feel alone." When he said Jake's name, I nearly jumped out of my seat. My heart started pounding in my chest. I hadn't told him my son's name. There was no way he could have known. I felt my throat tighten as 1,000 questions swirled through my mind, but I couldn't bring myself to ask any of them. I just sat there, staring at this man, wondering how in the world he knew. And then, as if he could read my thoughts, he said something that I'll never forget for the rest of my life. He spoke the exact words Jake had said to me the last time I saw him. They were words I'd kept close to my heart, words that only Jake and I knew. "Don't worry about me, Mom. I'm okay." That's what Jake had told me the day he left the house, just hours before the accident. It was the last thing he said to me. And now, here was this stranger, in the middle of an empty church, saying those same words. Tears filled my eyes. I tried to speak, to ask him how he knew, but the words wouldn't come. I was too stunned, too overwhelmed. The man stood up slowly and smiled again. That same peaceful smile, like he knew everything would be all right. "Jake's safe. You'll see him again." With that, he turned and walked down the aisle toward the back of the church. I sat there for a moment, trying to process everything that had just happened. When I finally gathered the strength to get up and follow him, he was gone. The doors were closed. The church was empty. I searched the entire building, but there was no sign of him. It was like he had vanished. I don't know who or what that man was, an angel, a messenger. I'm not sure. But what I do know is that in that moment, when I felt like I couldn't go on, he gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Maybe Jake really is still with me in ways I can't understand. Maybe I'm not as alone as I thought. I still visit that church sometimes, hoping to see that man again, but I never have. Still, every time I step inside, I feel a little lighter, like Jake's presence is there, watching over me. And that's enough for me now. So if you've lost someone, if you're struggling with grief like I was, just know that they might not be as far away as you think. Sometimes, when we're at our lowest, when we need it the most, we get a reminder that we're not alone. Thanks for letting me share this. I hope it brings some peace to whoever needs to hear it.
Thank you. I recommend watching the powerful video on the right.